The mystery surrounding her death has only grown.
We just saw firefighters pull the body out of the water tank.
That security video from the hotel has millions of views on YouTube.
And investigators said she died of an accidental drowning. But is that really what happened?
Hi friends, welcome to another video. For today, we are going to be looking into a very mysterious unsolved case that I have been absolutely fascinated with when I first heard about it back in 2013 on the news. And I'm always very drawn to cases like these because I feel very connected to the victim being somebody who is around my age. It just always hits so close to home. And this case involves a Canadian woman who went missing and was later found dead at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, California. Elisa Lam was born on April 30th, 1991 in Vancouver, British Columbia, to parents David and Yina, who immigrated to Canada from Hong Kong, where they settled in Burnaby, British Columbia, and opened up a restaurant there 9 years prior to 2013 when this case takes place. Elisa also had a sister and had been going to school at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. She was described as being very outgoing, friendly, and she seemed to really enjoy writing, as she had a blog and a Tumblr page where she would write posts about her life, her struggles, and her feelings. And this was especially true in 2012 when Elisa wrote a post discussing how her mental health was declining, which resulted in her dropping a number of courses at school. She noted feeling directionless and lost, and worrying that dropping these classes would reflect badly on her transcript and would prohibit her from being accepted into grad school. It's very hard in university to keep up with the continuous essays, going to the lectures, exams, balancing your social life, working, and I think a good percentage of post-secondary students suffer from a mental illness, often silently. I know I did. I was taking a look at Elisa's blog, and in amongst all of the fashion posts and things like that, there are a lot of posts discussing mental health and depression. And creepily enough, this blog actually remained active for a number of months after her death, with no reason as to why. Some people were speculating that this was due to some sort of auto post feature, but it said that her phone has never been found after her death, so perhaps somebody had managed to log into her account and was posting to this page for her. And there were active posts all the way up to December 2013 when Elisa actually died in February of that year. But all of her posts about mental health and depression and her feelings and things like that seemed to be a culmination of the mental health disorders that she had been diagnosed with, including bipolar disorder and depression. And she was apparently on different medications to help treat these. But Elisa was said to be very good at keeping her mental health issues to herself in her day-to-day life. So for all intents and purposes, we can surmise here that Elisa was a pretty normal 21-year-old. Mental health issues are so common amongst university students. We love to take to social media to express our feelings to whomever could be listening, even if it's nobody. And it just seemed like Elisa was trying to navigate her way through life as best as she could. So in early 2013, Elisa had embarked on a solo trip where she would be traveling down the west coast of the United States. Starting from British Columbia, she would be going down to San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, and San Francisco. She'd been taking the Amtrak train or buses, and most commonly reported on is her trip to the San Diego Zoo, where she had been posting pictures to social media, so people knew she was okay, which is very important in this type of situation, as Elisa was a young girl traveling alone in a different country. So these frequent social media posts were providing reassurance to her friends and family that she was all right. Apparently her parents were a bit wary of Elisa traveling by herself, as I'm sure most parents would be, but Elisa had been contacting her parents every day, so things seemed to be going well on her trip. So Elisa had been traveling in January, I would assume, because it would be off season, so a lot of the rates would be cheaper. And on January 26th, Elisa made it to Los Angeles and checked into the Cecil Hotel. Now, the Cecil Hotel is a very popular and well-known hotel that holds a ton of history. The Cecil is a 15-story hotel that was built in the 1920s, but once the Depression hit in the 30s, it was never really really able to reclaim its former glory. The hotel harbors many murders that have taken place here as well, including that of the Black Dahlia case in 1947 of actress Elizabeth Short, who was supposedly last seen at the Cecil Hotel, as well as Richard Ramirez in 1985, who was also known as the Night Stalker, who lived on the top floor of the hotel during his murdering spree. A woman named Pauline Otten also jumped to her death from the 9th floor, landing on a pedestrian, killing them both immediately. The Cecil Hotel has tried to rebrand and upgrade its reputation, but all of those events from history still linger within the hotel's walls. And the Cecil Hotel is known as being more of a cost-effective hotel and even offers hostel-style rooms for travelers who want to save a bit of money, because I would presume, though I've never been to Los Angeles, that it would be very expensive to stay there in LA, especially by yourself as a college student, and this probably helped the hotel keep costs down and attract more travelers due to the hotel's reputation and it apparently being in a more seedier area of the city. Elisa's room was on the 5th floor and was already occupied with a couple of roommates when she got there. And what these roommates immediately noticed about Elisa was that she was exhibiting some odd behavior, as they described it, which they apparently complained to the hotel staff about, though I'm not entirely sure what this odd behavior was. But regardless, Elisa was then transferred to her own room just a couple of days later. So on January 31st, Elisa was supposed to check out of the Cecil and leave for Santa Cruz. But her parents had not heard from her, and this was not normal, as Elisa had been contacting them every day during her trip. So they actually ended up calling the police in Los Angeles to go and do a welfare check on their daughter and make sure she was okay. And that's when Elisa could not be found anywhere. She could not be contacted, no one knew where she was. And after a bit of a wait and Elisa still hadn't turned up and a search was about to go underway, her parents and sister flew down from Canada to help with the search. And this is really saddening because when you're traveling by yourself, it is so important to make sure that people know where you are almost every step of the way, in my opinion, because you never know what could happen. I always think back to the movie Taken, which is actually one of my favorite movies, but when I first saw it in theaters, it scarred me because I was about to go to France like a week later, and in that movie the girls get taken into human trafficking almost immediately after they step foot into the country. And I think it can be even more of a worry for female solo travelers, not to say that men don't experience this, but you just hear of so many young women going missing and you just have to be vigilant and on guard for your safety. So back to Elisa, hotel staff at the Cecil said that they did see Elisa on the day of her disappearance and said that she had been alone. When questioning stores and other establishments nearby, the manager of a bookstore said that Elisa had been outgoing and friendly and had been in the bookstore buying gifts and souvenirs to take home to her family.
Katie Orphan is one of the last known people to see the 21-year-old Canadian tourist alive. Orphan is the manager of a bookstore just a few blocks from the Cecil Hotel. Orphan remembers Lam coming in to buy books and music records for her family in Vancouver, and says Lam worried about how she'd be able to fit the items she purchased inside her luggage.
It seemed like she had plans to return home, plans to give things to her family members and reconnect with them.
Meanwhile, police had gone to the Cecil and had searched throughout Elisa's hotel room, even having dogs go through to try and catch her scent, but this was met with no luck. The question is there if perhaps Elisa had gone into another room, whether by choice or by force, but of course police couldn't go through every single room inside the hotel, especially if somebody was in there, because they'd need probable cause in order to enter without that guest's permission. On February 6th, the LAPD decided to enlist the help of the public, and posters with Elisa's information were placed within the neighborhood as well as online in order to make people more familiar with Elisa's case and information. The media also picked up on the story, asking anyone with information on Elisa's case to come forward. Now, moving ahead to February 15th, there still was no sign of Elisa. No one had a valuable tip that the police could use, so they ended up releasing a very interesting video of the last time Elisa was known to have been seen at the hotel on the day of her disappearance, which was captured by an elevator security camera and is a very bizarre piece to this puzzle, making this case so much more confusing than it already is. And this video has gone viral. So many people have analyzed and talked about this video, and everything from the paranormal to a conspiracy to her mental health disorders were considered. blurred, and some even speculated that the video had been altered prior to its release by the police. The timestamp on the video is partially hidden, and the video itself is quite grainy, and at times as well, even Elisa's mouth gets pixelated, but I will show the video now. In the video, Elisa enters the elevator dressed in a red sweatshirt, black shorts, and sandals. She starts selecting a bunch of floors and then moves back to the corner of the elevator. The doors don't close for some reason, so she moves forward and leans her head through the doors, looks to the right and the left, then quickly steps back into the elevator, huddling into the corner by the control panel. The door remains open, so she goes to the door again. And I wonder if the reason why the elevator wasn't moving at this point was because she was messing around with the buttons too much. I used to live in an apartment building with 3 very temperamental elevators that would always act up. So maybe the elevator locked up or something. So perhaps the elevator could have malfunctioned due to that reason, though I'm not 100% sure. Then Elisa starts doing something odd. She steps out into the hall and goes back and forth outside and inside the elevator, and eventually stays mostly hidden behind the wall. She seems frightened, almost paranoid. Her right arm goes up over her head, and she goes back inside the elevator and puts both hands on the side of the door. She then goes to the control panel, presses a bunch of buttons again, and then leaves the elevator once more, putting her hands up to her ears. And this whole time, the doors are staying open. She turns to the right and rubs her arms and then shakes them out. And then just walks away. And that's when the doors finally close. And like I was saying before, people were suspecting all sorts of things, that she was being chased by someone and was trying to hide from them in the elevator or get away from them. Others thought that she was high on some sort of drug, and others speculated that she was experiencing some sort of psychotic break from her bipolar disorder. As for the video being tampered with, people argued that since the timestamp was obscured, the video may have been slowed down in places, and thought that about a minute of footage had been removed, claiming that maybe this had been done to conceal the identity of someone who may have been in the video but had nothing to do with the case, like a guest or a maid walking by, or it was thought that that missing footage could have been hiding evidence of a criminal act taking place. While the search for Elisa was going on, guests at the Cecil started complaining about their water. There were issues with the water pressure, some were saying it was too low, and others said that their water was black and tasted strange. Although I don't know why you would be tasting black colored water in the first place. I sure as hell would be checking out right away if I saw that. But a guest said that when they turned on the shower, the water that came out would be black for a couple of seconds before then returning to its normal clear color.
You know, what kind of role did the hotel guests play in all of this? Apparently they were very concerned about the water pressure, and you know, then once they learned why, did the hotel guests know about this? How were they enlightened, so to speak?
Well, some of them learned by watching the local news. You may notice that the front doors of this hotel are open. The hotel has not closed. It has stayed open. It is on a flush order, meaning that all the people who are here, they can only use it to flush the toilets. No showering, no washing your hands, definitely no drinking of the water. So we've spoken to some residents here who say that the hotel has not been honest with them, not been forthcoming. The hotel is having them sign waivers saying, yeah, you can stay here at the hotel, but it's not our fault if anything happens to you. We do want to add, Fred, that we did call the Department of Public Health. The Public Health Department is thoroughly testing the water now.
Then on February 19th, after numerous complaints, a maintenance worker went up to the water tanks on the roof of the building to investigate the complaints of the guests and see if he could figure out the source of the weird looking and tasting water. And what he found when he opened the tank and peered to the bottom was beyond anything he could have imagined, because the body of Elisa Lam was floating face up at him in the water. The tank was drained immediately and actually cut open because the maintenance hatch was too small to get the equipment inside that was needed to remove Elisa's body from the tank. Her body was found naked, her clothes floating around her, which were apparently covered in some sort of sand-like particles as they've been described, with her room key and watch also found inside the tank. Her body was already decomposing and bloated. Her skin was tinged green with a marbling effect on her abdomen, which I believe is caused by bacteria, and her skin was beginning to separate. So it was pretty clear that Elisa's body had been inside this water tank for quite a while. The water tanks for the Cecil Hotel were 1,000 gallons and provided water to the entire hotel, including the guests' rooms, the kitchen, and a coffee shop. And reportedly, Elisa's body had been inside that water, slowly decomposing, for around 19 days. What makes no sense is that it took the LA County Coroner's Office 4 months to release the autopsy report, which they cited as being due to repeated delays. However, the autopsy found that there were no drugs or alcohol in Elisa's system, but there were small amounts of prescription drugs that were found. I would presume from the meds that she had been taking for her mental health issues. There was also no evidence of physical trauma or sexual assault that they could determine, though I did read that they did not perform a test for any date rape drugs in her system, and it's unclear if she was given a rape kit either. And apparently Elisa had evidence of anal bleeding, though reportedly that had just been caused from her body decomposing, and it was concluded that Elisa's cause of death was accidental drowning. But there were so many questions surrounding this discovery. Why 4 months? That seems like such a long time to come to the conclusion of her death being due to accidental drowning. Why was she naked? And the reason why she was found in that tank is still unknown to this day. Her body was sitting in that tank for 3 weeks, and I've heard that certain substances within your body can leave it after a little bit of time. So perhaps Elisa's death was the result of some sort of substance and it had just been flushed out of her body post-mortem. After her body was found and was being examined, the Cecil Hotel stayed open and people were still checking in. The public health department in LA had tested the water supply and told the manager that they could stay open as long as they provided separate water that did not come from those water tanks and had to tell the guests not to drink the tap water. But the guests were also required to sign a waiver that released the hotel from any liability if they fell ill due to drinking or bathing in that water. And the guests who already paid for their rooms would not get refunds if they left. And apparently some of the guests weren't even informed as to what had happened in that water tank, which is just completely unacceptable, and guests sued the hotel over this, rightfully so in my opinion, and Elisa's parents actually filed a lawsuit themselves later that year, citing that the hotel had a duty to inspect and seek out hazards that presented an unreasonable risk of danger to Elisa and other guests. The hotel refuted this and filed a motion to dismiss it, arguing that the hotel had no reason to think that the guests were going to be trying to get into their water tanks. So this lawsuit was ultimately dismissed due to Elisa's death being ruled as unforeseeable, since it happened in an area of the hotel that guests weren't allowed to access. An event like this had never happened before at the hotel of someone trying to get into the water tanks. And of course, who was going to try to get into the water tanks at a hotel and for what reason? So after this whole situation, the Cecil Hotel rebranded their hotel name to Stay on Main, probably to try to displace the negative attention brought on by Elisa Lam's case and all the other previous historical events that had happened there, and just to try to start over fresh. Although the investigation determined how Elisa supposedly died, it still did not determine how she ended up in that water tank in the first place. The doors and stairs to the roof of the hotel were locked, with only staff having access to that area, and anyone trying to get up there would trigger an alarm system. And if this alarm is triggered, then a security guard or employee is supposed to check that area immediately and see if anyone has accessed that area. And it was stated by the hotel that that alarm system for the rooftop door had not been activated at any point in January or February of 2013. However, the fire escape could have allowed her to get past those doors, an alarm system, and somebody actually tried to do this in a video to see if this was actually something Elisa could have done on her own, and this was accomplished. They got onto the fire escape, got onto the roof, and saw that 2 of the water tank lids were open. But could she have gotten into those water tanks on her own? All of the water tanks on the roof of the hotel were 4 by 8 feet cylinders that were sitting on concrete blocks. A ladder would have to be used to access the entrances to these tanks, as there weren't any easy ways to get in there. The way to get into these tanks is by climbing a ladder up the concrete platform, squeezing through the plumbing equipment and tanks to reach another narrow ladder, and then climb up the side of the 10-foot tall tank. As well, someone could also theoretically get into the water tank by climbing to the top of the elevator utility room and jumping down into the tank from above. But then how would the lid get back on and locked? Elisa was quite a small woman, and that lid would have been heavy, so how would she have done that on her own? A point that I saw made on only one website while researching for this case was that a detective said Elisa was seen in a second elevator security video, and that she was with 2 men who had a box and gave it to her, to where she went back up to her floor, and the men were never seen again. And there isn't any other information on this. I find it unlikely that this was an Amazon package being delivered or something. Things being delivered I don't think was as readily used as it is today, so perhaps it was a drug deal. Maybe she ordered drugs and had them brought to the hotel to be given to her in a more inconspicuous way. I'm not even sure if this is a real claim, and it just seems like a very weird thing to have a box delivered to you at a hotel. As well, while searching the hotel for Elisa or any evidence that could pertain to her case, Elisa's backpack, laptop, and other belongings were found hidden in the basement, and it apparently led police to believe that she was planning on returning. But that just strikes me as odd, because why on earth would Elisa have been in the basement of the Cecil Hotel? It's not like you're going to get better Wi-Fi reception down there. It seems more likely to me that someone had swiped these items from her room, perhaps while the search was being conducted, and hid them down in the basement for safekeeping until this all blew over and then they could take them. People also thought that Elisa's death seemed very similar to that of the 2005 movie Dark Water. In this film, a mother and daughter move into a dingy apartment with a dysfunctional elevator. There's also discolored water coming from the faucets that leads them to the building's rooftop water tank, where the body of a girl who was reported as missing from that building a year earlier was found. Elisa and the main character are wearing very similar outfits, so maybe someone was trying to copycat this movie and make it a real-life event. Maybe she was recreating it herself. Elisa's death was also drawn upon for TV show episodes like How to Get Away with Murder and Castle, and a script for a movie inspired by these events was also sold to a production company in 2014. As well, this case was also apparently used as inspiration for the 5th season of American Horror Story, where Elisa's case was referenced in an episode where a story was told about a school teacher who committed suicide in the hotel in the show and laid in the bathtub for weeks before anyone found her, with guests in the story saying that the water tasted and smelled bad. It was thought that ecstasy could have been a reason as to why Elisa was acting so erratically inside the elevator. A former drug expert in the LAPD suspected that in the video, Elisa appeared to be dancing or petting something, thinking that that could potentially be attributed to an ecstasy pill containing MDMA or some other kind of hallucinogen. In addition to this, the cause of Elisa's death may have been due to a hallucinogenic episode from her bipolar medication, which was known to have these type of side effects. A Reddit user called Hammy Sammy suspected that based on the toxicology report that Elisa may not have been taking her medications properly, suggesting that she had taken her antidepressant on the day of her disappearance, her second antidepressant and mood stabilizer recently in the days before that, and had not taken her antipsychotic recently. Using antidepressants to treat bipolar disorder can lead to manic side effects if not done using caution. Some speculate that maybe this is why Elisa was acting so strange in the elevator. As well, she may have been experiencing psychomotor agitation, which is where someone performs a series of unintentional and purposeless motions that are the result of mental tension and anxiety. And this is a symptom of mania, which someone with bipolar disorder and on these medications may experience. Also, sometimes when experiencing a manic episode, that person may feel restless, have a strong desire to increase activity, and apparently makes you have an unrealistic belief in what you're able to do. In addition to this, she may have been experiencing the early symptoms of schizophrenia, as often schizophrenia develops when you're in your early 20s. So you could just slowly start building up the particular behaviors that go along with schizophrenia, and that could have been why she was acting strangely in the elevator, not really understanding what was happening to her and experiencing a schizophrenic episode. However, at the same time, I think that goes in line with what I was saying about bipolar disorder, because schizophrenia too is often treated with antipsychotics. So I wonder if perhaps she did have undiagnosed schizophrenia, and those antipsychotics that she was taking for her bipolar disorder were kind of keeping these schizophrenic symptoms at bay. In any case, Elisa did have a history of mental illness, and her roommates in the hotel room had complained about her strange behavior before she was moved to a different room, so it's not an entirely unlikely theory, in my opinion. And then another theory proposes that Elisa had been murdered by a hotel employee. Although there isn't any evidence saying that she was murdered, there's really nothing saying she wasn't either. Maybe someone had seen her posting on social media, knew that she was traveling alone, and was staying at the Cecil. Maybe someone had access to the roof and could turn off the alarm, who knew how to avoid being seen on the security camera, or knew somebody that could cut it out for them, or knew how to themselves. It has been suspected that Elisa's reason for pressing so many buttons inside the elevator could be due to her trying to throw anybody off who may have been following her, so they couldn't tell which floor she'd gotten off at. The next theory is that Elisa was assassinated over a government project. Elisa had posted on Twitter about an invisibility cloaking project that was funded by the Pentagon right before she died. There was a link to a Huffington Post article, and this cloak apparently helps make military soldiers invisible, or something to that degree, and that this has been a project that's been in the works with the US and South Korea. So perhaps someone somewhere in the government thought that Elisa knew too much and wanted to quiet her down. But I mean, if she just retweeted the link, wouldn't a ton of other people have access to do that as well? It wasn't her original tweet, she'd reposted it from the Huffington Post, which is a very popular news website. So I'm not too sure about that one. And then apparently during the time that Elisa was staying at the Cecil Hotel, there was a severe tuberculosis outbreak on Skid Row, which is located very close to the hotel. What blows my mind is the TB test that was being used in that area was called the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, called the LEISA for short, which literally spells her name. People were suspecting that even though no drugs were found in her system in the autopsy report, due to that autopsy report being released so much later due to all of these delays, people believe that this autopsy could have been altered in some way to omit the TB drugs. Some people think that Elisa never even existed and that this whole thing was made up to distract the public from a supposed government-sponsored tuberculosis outbreak and testing, so that anyone who tries to do research on this LAM-ELISA would only find search results of the tragic accidental death of this young girl. People also think that there may have been a ghost that was tormenting her during her stay at the hotel, or that she was possessed by a spirit who forced her to commit suicide by drowning herself in the water tank, and perhaps that's why the door wasn't closing and only closed after Elisa left that elevator. But on a note that is not supernatural, had Elisa actually wanted to commit suicide due to her mental illness or whatever mitigating factors there may be, why would she have wanted to do that in a water tank? That just seems overly complicated. I am not promoting suicide in the slightest, but I'm just saying, Wouldn't there be easier ways to do that? If she was that close to her family, why would she want them to think that she'd gone missing if she was going to commit suicide? I know that it is common to commit suicide inside hotel rooms, but I feel like she wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to manage to get into that water tank and commit suicide that way. It just seems really odd and out of character for her. She had mental health issues and very well could have been suicidal, but I feel like this would have been too much work for this. As well, she could have been under the influence of something that may have led her to do this, even though the toxicology report states that there were no drugs or alcohol found in her system. Like I was saying before, I've read that some substances can leave your body after you die and make it look like it was never there in the first place. Another theory is that Elisa may have traveled to another dimension by playing a game called the elevator game. And this seems to be what the majority of the internet thinks happened to her. Now, this game freaks the hell out of me, as do most games like this that you can find on the internet. And I guess according to the buttons that Elisa had pressed, corresponds to how the elevator game is played. And the way that the elevator game works is that you have to play it by yourself in a building with at least 10 stories, pressing buttons to different floors. And during this ritual, you may experience hearing voices, a mysterious woman may get on the elevator with you whom you cannot acknowledge. And by the time you've completed this game and stepped out of the elevator, you should be in another world. And then you have to figure out the proper way on how to get back to your own world. So basically what people are saying with this theory is that Elisa had played the elevator game and that something had gone horribly wrong. But then again, I believe you're supposed to play this game in an empty building, not a hotel filled with people. So I'm not entirely sure how true that theory could be, but it is a very popular one. I continuously find it interesting how people on the internet play detective, trying to put together clues and make assumptions when they aren't a police officer or have any sort of background in like criminology or anything like that. Obviously, I'm kind of doing the same thing here, so I think it's fine. As long as people aren't actually interfering within an investigation. You know, people have different perspectives on everything, and sometimes people can see things and hash things out perhaps more effectively than the police can. But unfortunately, that is where today's video ends, and it's absolutely crazy to me that this is one of the more popular true crime cases on the internet, with so many eyes looking into this case and just nothing's come of it. But that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I would love to hear any thoughts, opinions, theories that you guys may have on this case. And if you are new to my channel, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.